Now we are going to take user inputs and send it to backend. So we are going to make API calls to it. And for this one, we are going to use another library, Axios. Axios is promise-based HTTP client for the browser and Node.js application. So let's install this one. But first, let's make sure you stop both the application and the test console, because we are now installing new dependency and both our application and the test must be restarted. First, let's install the dependency. We are going to install npm install axios. By the way, instead of typing install, we can go with shorter like this, npm I axios. Now the package is installed. Let's run application once again, running npm start and also running the test console npm test. And let's make sure you reload the application on browser. Now let's add our new test. So it's going to be similar to this one. By the setup part, we are going to render a sign up page and we will query the inputs and we will fill them, just copying this one. So we will be changing this one. So in this test, it sends username, email, and password to backend after clicking the button. So we are going to take username, email, and password in the request. So we are going to type values into these inputs. We also need to type value into password repeat so that we will be able to click the button. So let's copy this one and let's query other inputs. This is for username. Say this is username input and the other one is email input, and let's repeat the user event type parts. We are going to type to user input, let's say we type user1, and for the email, let's make this email input. The email input we will be typing user1@mail.com. Then we are going to click to the button. So we do that by running user event click button. So after clicking the button in our application, we will be making an API call to backend. So this is going to be triggering an HTTP request to be sent out from the application. But in test environment, we cannot rely on to a real HTTP request going to backend. If we forget to start the backend, then the test will fail here, but that doesn't mean we have problem with our application implementation. So to get consistent test results, instead of relying to an external service like this backend for this case, we will mock the behavior. So before clicking the button, we will be having a mock implementation. First thing is, we are going to create a mock function, and jest has this fn function, which is basically creating a mock function for us. So let's say this is mock fn. Then we are going to mock the functionality of the axios, the library we just installed. We are going to use axios to send the HTTP request, but in test we are going to use its mocked version. So first let's import axios from the axios package we installed, and in the application we are going to send post request to backend having the values we have here. So we are going to use axios post function, and here in this test we are mocking this post functionality. Now after clicking the button, our mock function will be called, and with mock function we can access to the parameters it is receiving or how many times it is called. We can do our assertion based on this mock function capabilities. So we can access to the each call of this mock function like this. This mock fn has mock object and it has calls object, which is containing the call history of it. So this mock function can be called multiple times, and we are going to get the first call because we know that we are just going to call only one time, and we are looking for the first call. And this is, let's say, assigned to a variable. This is the first call of mock function. And from this one, we can access to the parameters it is receiving while we are calling that one. So basically, we will be using axios like this. We will call axios post, and as a first parameter, it is looking for URL. This is the URL we are going to be passing, and as a second parameter, this is looking for the data, which is the request body, and which will be containing this username, email, and password. So the second parameter is the request body, which is what we are looking for in the test at the moment. So we are looking for this second parameter of this first call, and we can access like this. This is going to be body, and this is first call of mock functions. Second parameter, this is an array, the first one and the second one, index 1. So we can now do the assertion part. We can say we are expecting this body. This is going to be an object, and we will do object comparison here. So we will use another matcher to equal, and we pass the object we are looking for. So we are looking for an object having this username field, and the value will be the value we are typing right here. So we will have user1, and we are looking for email, which is user1@mail.com, and the last one is the password, and it's going to be this one. So we are looking for these values which we type into these inputs in the body object we are passing to this mock function. So let's save this one. So this one is failing because we don't have this implementation yet. It's failing at this step. It's not able to find the second parameter of this first call. It is indicating right here because this is undefined. We have never called the axios post in our component yet. Let's do that. First thing is we are going to use axios. So let's import axios. And we are going to be calling a function when we are clicking this button. So let's have that function here. So we will have, let's say this is a function name we choose. I go with the submit. So we have this submit, and this submit will be called when we click to this button. So just like listening the changes in the inputs, we set the on change, and for the button we are looking for click event, so we will be using on click, and whenever this button is clicked, we will be calling this submit. Now we need to create an object here, so we will have a body object, but this object will be containing all the values of these inputs, the username, email, and password. So just like listening the changes for the password and password repeat, we will be doing same thing right here. Let's add on change username. So this is going to be updating username in state, and on change email, and this is going to be updating email. So let's have the state values, username and email. Now let's assign these functions. So this is for username input, this on change username, and this one is for email input, this on change email. Now we are updating our state with the information from these inputs. Now in this submit, we can create our object So basically we will be taking the values username, email and password from state, and we can get them by object destructuring. So we will take username, email, password from state, and we are going to call axios post, and this is taking two parameters. Again, we have seen in the test code. This is taking URL as a first parameter, and the URL for the registration in backend is this one, API 10 users, and the second parameter is the body object. So we can create a body like this. It is basically having all these fields, username, email and password, and we can use object shorthand create since the object value and the variable having the same name. So we have this body object and we can pass the body as second parameter. Now let's save this one, and here we can see the test is passing. Now let's go over what we have done here. In component we are having the states for username, email, password. We are listening the change events for all of these inputs. We are taking the values and storing in the state. Then after clicking the button, we are calling this function, and in this function we are creating a body object having these fields and corresponding values, and we are calling this axios post functionality with the URL and the body object. And in test we did the same thing, but only the difference is we replaced axios post with the mock function, and we get the mock function call, and we take the function's parameters like this, and we check the assertion part right here. Now let's try this one on browser. Let's open developer tools. Let's go to the network tab. Let's clear previous logs. Now let's fill this one. Let's go with user1 at mail, password and password, and clicking sign up. Here we are seeing there's this user post request which is ending up with not found, and here in the payload we can see the request is having this object. Now let's do one more change here. After filling the form we have to manually click the sign up, but instead of clicking sign up we can do the same thing by hitting enter. But currently if we hit enter at this point, nothing is happening. For making enter to submit this request, we need to wrap the elements with HTML form element. So here we will wrap this one with form, and let's close form here, and let's fix the indentation. Now let's save this one. Now we have this console error log here in the test output, but first let's try this one on browser. Again, opening the DevTools, clearing the logs, and let's fill the form with any value you like, password and password. Now I hit enter, and here we are seeing a request is sent to backend with the values I am filling, but this is causing this application to reload. Here we can see the bundle.js and the others are downloaded once again after we hit enter. Because this event triggered from the form element right now, within this form element we are clicking this button, so this is triggering an event, but now this event is also processed by the browser. So browser is also trying to submit the request to backend, and that is leading a reload on the browser, and also this error log we see in the console is happening because of that behavior. Now we can fix this one right here in submit. So when we click the button, this submit is called, and we can access to that click event like this, and we can say we want to process the event only in this function, in the submit function. We don't want browser to do its role for this event, so we can do it like this. We just call events prevent default function. So let's save this one. Now the error is gone from the test console, and if we again, let's fill the form on browser, and hitting enter, and we only see this request and the page is not reloaded. Before finishing this part, let's refactor our implementation here. Currently these onChange functions are doing same thing. They are just taking the value from event and updating corresponding state field. Instead of having separate onChange functions, we can use the events to take the input information from it. So we have these IDs assigned to these inputs, and just like accessing to this inputs value, like this event target value, we can access to that inputs ID, and basically that ID is matching to our state fields. So we can have a single onChange function, and is going to be taking event, and from this event we can take both the value and ID, and we can get it by object destructuring. So we will take ID and value from event target. Then basically we are going to update corresponding state value, and we can do it like this set state, and this time the field is dynamic and that value is right here, and we can do it like this in square brackets. We pass the ID, so this is going to be username, email, password, and so on. So we are updating that field with the value, and now we can remove all these onChange functions, and let's update this assignment. So instead of having onChange username, now we have onChange for the username input, email input, password input, and password repeat input. All of them are calling this onChange function, and in this function we take the ID to find out which input is sending this event, and taking the value of that input and setting corresponding state values in component state. Let's save this one, and the tests are confirming everything is working as expected. We can also test this on browser one more time. Let's say this is A, B, C, and this one is C, sending the request. Here we have A in the username, B in the email, and the password is C. So the onChange is properly taking the values from inputs and assigning corresponding state values. Now we have the API call logic in our component, and we are using axios for sending our request to backend. Instead of having axios, we could have used the built-in functionality of the browsers, fetch, and we can do the same request with that one too. So let's do that. Here, instead of using axios post, let's comment this out. We are going to call fetch, and fetch is looking for the URL as a first parameter, and that URL is API 10 users, and as a second parameter it is looking for an object, and in this object it looks for this method, and in axios we were using the post method directly to send the post request, but in fetch we have to define the method like this. In this second parameter object we have this method, and the method will be post. Then we will tell the content of this request by setting the content type header, content dash type, which is going to be application/JSON, and then we can add the body, and this body is going to be our request body, but we need to convert it to string. and we can convert it by using JSON stringify, and all we need to do is just pass the body object we have here. So we can use like this instead of this axios post. So let's save this one. Now our test is failing because the test was dependent onto the axios. We were mocking the axios, so we were checking the call history of the mock function. But now we are not calling axios post, therefore our mock function right here, which is assigned to axios post, is never called. So our assertions right here is failing. But let's test this one on browser. So let's open developer tools. Let's clear these logs and let's fill the form. So let's go with like this again. And here we are sending the request. We are able to add the correct payload to the request, and in the end we are receiving the 404 not found back. So from browser point of view, it doesn't matter if we are using fetch or axios, the behavior is same. Now we need to update our test to make sure it is properly mocking the fetch functionality. So we were mocking the axios, but now we are using fetch, so we have to update our test to mock the fetch functionality. So we are going to do like this. We were mocking the axios post, now we are going to mock window fetch. The fetch is part of the window object of the browser, and we are going to assign mock fn to it. Now the call history is taking the first call, and in axios the second parameter, which was this one, was pointing to the body object, but now we are calling fetch, and the first parameter URL, second parameter is an object. Now in this object the body is right here, so basically we are going to get this first call mock function second parameter, this is object, and from this object we will get the body, and this is a body object with the string version of this JSON. So we are comparing it to an actual JSON object, so let's make sure we convert it back to JSON by JSON parse, and we pass the body we are taking from the fetch. Let's save this one. Now our test is passing. The mocking is a useful technique to make our test to run in a predictable environment, but as we can see here, it is directly related to our internal implementation. Like, we switch from axios to fetch and our tests failed, but on the other hand, from user point of view in browser, nothing is changed. So we must be creating our tests as close as possible to real user interactions, and luckily for this case, instead of mocking fetch or axios, we can use this library, MSW, mock service worker. And this library is intercepting the requests which are actually going to the target server. And with this interceptor, we can mimic the behavior of backend. So we are going to install this library. First, let's stop the test console and clearing this screen and installing this dependency, npm install. This is a development dependency, so adding -- save dev, or we can go shorter, just npm i -d, and the package name is msw. The package is installed. Let's run the tests once again. And let's use this MSW in our test module. So first thing is we are going to import from MSW node package we are importing the setup server function. And in our test, before rendering our component, let's create a server. So we call setup server. And this setup server function is taking REST handlers. So we are going to import another function from directly MSW, and that function is REST. So we are going to have REST handlers right here in the MSW in our test module. So we are passing this REST, and this is going to be handling post request, and the requests will be going to API 10 users. And second parameter is we are going to be having a function which is taking request, response, and context, and we are going to return, and we will be using res response, and we will set context status 200. So it is just returning 200 OK back. So we have this REST endpoint for handling the request coming to this endpoint, and the request will be post method, and it's going to return 200 OK. Now let's run the server in listening mode. Then we are rendering sign up page, then filling the form, then clicking the button. After we click the button, this REST endpoint will be receiving the request. So in this handler, we can get the body. We can get body like this from request. We can take the body and let's assign it to a variable here. Let's say we have this request body variable here, and let's assign the request.body to this request body. But there's an important detail here, which is this is an asynchronous action. So after clicking the button, we must be making sure the request is reached to this one before we do any assertion. So let's wait here, and let's use async await functionality. So changing the test function as async, and we are going to await here, and let's have a promise. This is a temporary operation. We don't know when the server is receiving the request, so let's make sure this test code stays at this line for a moment. So the promise is having a callback, which is calling set timeout and passing result to it, and let's wait for 500 milliseconds. So at this line the code will be waiting, and until then the server will be receiving the request body. So at this point we don't need to deal with the mock functions anymore, and we can directly check this request body equality to the object we are passing right here. So let's save this one, and the test is passing. So with this way, in our test, we don't care about the implementation details. So we don't know if we are using axios or we are using fetch. It doesn't matter. Let's confirm that. Let's remove fetch and let's go with axios again. So saving this one. And here we can see the tests are passing. So again, the mocking is a very good technique in scenarios where external services are taking place. With mocking, we are able to create reliable test environment, but the downside of it, our tests are being highly coupled with our implementation. So if we can avoid mocking, then we should be avoiding it. And this MSW library is a great replacement for backend in client tests. I will be continuing with the axios, and now we are going to use this server in our tests for the next test cases.